Most noble citizens, we must bypass a life of dormancy and vice to pursue the generative endeavor of a hard day's work. The benefits of these pursuits are not secured by chance or charity, but through the merit of your character and the firmness of your convictions. It is you who are planting the seeds of trees whose shade you know you shall never see.
Hello. Hey. Welcome, friends. You're behind the paywall, which means you're on the Patreon, and we thank you for that.
We might do this one free. I don't know. In honor of
you're right.
MLK and Black History
Month.
It's
a forbidden course.
This is
typically we do these kind of things
into
behind
the
paywall,
forbidden course, but it. We're deciding right now on air. We're gonna release this one for free, you guys. You're welcome.
We like to let you into the producing process periodically. So you can see how chaotic I'm constantly trying to make it by doing it all live. But it's my friend and producer Roger Berkowitz. He continues to keep rocking these episodes out with just a jam packed with sound effects and things of nature. So
we'll try to fit one in there.
Sometimes too many, yeah. We always try and keep it light and try and have a little fun. And we're coming into Black History Month, and so my friend here wanted us to take a moment to just return and sit our asses down and listen to some of the wise words of a very wise man, a certain Dr. Martin Luther King. We're going to be going over the letter from the Birmingham Jail here. And I'll let my co-host sort of introduce it and talk about it as we get started. So, why do you want to go over this piece here for the people? I'm sure many of them are aware of it, but what made you want to revisit it?
Yeah, I think it's worth revisiting in this moment, in particular, right now with civil disobedience on the rise. This is, I believe, one of the really fundamental works of MLK. He's really pouring it out here. In this letter, in the conditions that he's in, having just gone to jail for his belief in civil disobedience. And he's writing a letter to several Southern ministers who he is expressing disappointment in, and expresses disappointment in the famous line about the white moderate who's disappointed in him.
Right.
So there's a lot of great subject matter here. There's some funny relevance to Elon Musk, a recent tweet that he did about, white genocide and how oppressed white people are.
And I'm glad you put that context in there too, because it's often the case that some of the best and most insightful documents of history that we get from people to really understand their thinking is when they are elaborating on the differences in their thinking to other contemporaries who are their ostensible allies.
Their peers,
right.
Supposed to be brothers in Christ, right?
Right,
I mean,
literally. And in this context, for the first sentences here is just referring to the clergy people calling his actions unwise and untimely. And it really does speak to the kind of like tut-tutting that is so commonplace from the sideliners and the fence sitters in moments when people are putting their necks out there for something they really believe in.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to read this whole letter, and then we can stop as we go.
Sounds good.
And then, and the other thing too, I'll say is that I think we should let a lot of these words speak for themselves as part of like the Black History Month, inspiration for all this.
Lightly intersperse it with our own, and to draw from the relevance of the current moment.
He talks
but
Nazis,
definitely
talks the white moderate.
Yeah, let him do the most of the talking.
The heavy lifting on a lot of this.
And then just tie in some of the current events, because there's relevance that obviously he can't talk about what's happening right now in Minnesota. Right. But to just let his words speak for the current moment is what I want.
So I'm going to just start from the top, okay?
Yeah, and I don't think actually the top part about the from the Birmingham jail adds much. I don't think we need to even worry about that backstory part unless you think that adds.
Right. Well, I feel like we've got it. Yeah, we've got the backstory part.
Yeah, we gave the backstory.
I'm on Africa. I'm on the University of Penn website that has the speech printed on there. So that's where I'm reading from.
Gotcha.
So I'm going to just start. You ready?
Yeah, so starting from while confined, right?
So while confined here in Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that cross my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statements in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the views which argue against outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern... Yes, outsiders coming in. I mean,
key part.
The views which argue against outsiders coming in, that really stuck with me when I read it there and heard it, the robot saying it. But
yeah, think of Trump and how he says the enemy within. But yeah.
The whole trope of bust-in protesters being like somehow less legitimate has roots in the civil rights movement, and it's one of the reasons why when we talked about doing this, one of the reasons I wanted to do it was the way in which people are talking about paid protesters right now. I find it really despicable. And when you hear that they had almost the same arguments during the f***ing civil rights movement, it kind of, clicks a few things together. So yeah. I think I should indicate why I'm here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state, with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We have some 85 affiliated organizations across the South, and one of them is the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. Frequently, we share staff, educational, and financial resources with our affiliates. Several months ago, the affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promise. So I, along with several other members of staff, am here because I was invited here. I am here because I have organizational ties here. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. I bet that joke killed with Christian. That's I don't even get what that's about, right? But I bet that one people were loving that line. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Now that's a key part right there, I think, to elaborate on. And to talk about, too, we were saying, and I think it was Hassan pointed out how he was one of the first, possibly in public, to say that the protests in Minnesota and ICE right now have a direct relationship to what happened to the Palestinian people and the IDF. Yes. Basically, the tactics of ICE have been adapted by the IDF. And so for those people who sat idly by and did nothing about the injustice in Palestine, now the imperial boomerang says that essentially that behavior is going to come back around.
It's the same thing for people who can't understand why so many young Americans couldn't swallow the bitter pill of voting for the Democrats when they were prosecuting a genocide against the Palestinians. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and people understand that instinctually, and it's part of why despite the efforts to whitewash and remove many of the like radical elements of MLK's programs and ideas, right. He was someone who had a really profound belief in justice that people really resonated with at that time, and that's why he's such a enduring figure.
And as we move on, we'll talk about the term radical or extremist, right. And that's a major part. But yeah, we'll keep on reading.
One step at a time.
Yeah.
So we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial outside agitator idea. And see, it's already known as narrow and provincial, at least to MLK in this day and age.
Yeah.
And the fact that it still hasn't gone away is kind of saddening. You know, to really, at the end of the day, it's like...
Yeah, to call people outside agitators.
It frustrates the hell out of me. So anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds.
Exactly.
There
is no enemy within, except those who would say that there is an enemy within.
Yes. You deplore the demonstration taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. I'm sure that none of you would want to rest content with the superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. Insert the JFK quote, right. Too.
Or insert Minneapolis campaign, and insert the working class there. That this is all just synonymous for one another. The communities that have been left out by the power structures.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's frustrating, again, to see how little these ideas seem to have progressed and indeed regressed. But that's why we take time to, reflect on these things. So in any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. Collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in these courts. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than any other city in the nation. These are the hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. Then, last September, came the opportunity to talk with the leaders of Birmingham's economic community. In the course of the negotiations, certain promises were made by the merchants. For example, to remove the store's humiliating racial sign. On the basis of these promises, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and leaders of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights agreed to a moratorium on all demonstrations. As the weeks and months went by, we realized that we were the victims of a broken promise. A few signs briefly removed returned, the others remained. As in so many past experiences, our hope had been blasted and the shadow of the deep disappointment settled upon all of us. We had no alternative except to prepare for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. Mindful of the difficulties involved, we decided to undertake a process of self-purification. We began a series of workshops on nonviolence, and we repeatedly asked, realizing that except for Christmas, this is the main, we repeatedly asked ourselves, are you able to accept blows without retaliating? Are you able to endure the ordeal of jail? We decided to schedule our direct action program for the Easter season, realizing that except for Christmas, this is the main shopping period of the year. Knowing that a strong economic withdrawal program would be the byproduct of direct action, we felt that this would be the best time to bring pressure to bear on the merchants for the needed change. So they're taking economic nonviolent actions, but that really sticks out to me too, that they made a deal, very reasonable demands, and they get an agreement to the deal, and then they do not get the actual conditions of the agreement by the other party.
Yeah, as he said,
and
they refuse to engage in good faith negotiation, which is something that labor unions also experience.
Well, and it's something the Palestinians are experiencing right now, and it's very upsetting because it's dipped out of the discourse so much because there's so much other insane shit going on. But it really is sad to see the way in which a false peace deal is a frequently used weapon by oppressors to make a deal that everyone feels like they can feel good about just to basically buy themselves time to entrench their positions.
Yeah, or
it's awful, but it happens all too often. A board of peace, exactly. So, okay.
Yeah, so then, want me to continue or you want to keep...
No, I got a lot of mucus, but I got this. Then, last September, came the opportunity to talk with leaders of Birmingham's economic community. In the course, that's that. Okay. Then it occurred to us that the Birmingham mayoral election was coming up in March, and we speedily decided to postpone action until after Election Day. When we discovered that the Commissioner of Public Safety, Eugene Bull Connor, had piled up enough votes to be in the runoff, we decided again to postpone action until the day after the runoff so that the demonstrations could not be used to cloud the issues. Like many others, we waited to see Mr. Connor defeated, and to this end, we endured postponement after postponement. After having aided in this community need, we felt that our direct action program could be delayed no longer. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You're quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as a part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather necessary for growth. Just as Socrates
may sound
felt
rather shocking.
Rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that the individual could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, so must we see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood.
There's my boy Socrates.
I knew. That's really why we're doing this, listener.
Yeah, and remember, we did do the Republic. If you want to check that one out.
Well, and we mentioned in
it's
that
all
too,
very
it's
related.
But it's
philosophy,
right? Like the stuff comes back over and over again for a reason. So the purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. I therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in a tragic effort to live in monologue rather than dialogue. That is a poignant sentiment, I must say. That last sentence rather in particular.
Dialogue. Yeah, listening to yourself speak,
do they love monologuing in the South.
To the other side.
Oh boy, do they love doing that. Let me tell you what. Yeah. So, I mean, that paragraph there, just to summarize too, is to say that when we think about what does nonviolent direct action look like in the modern day, one of the tactics is to film, is to get it on camera, to get it recorded, and to post it up.
As you said.
And that must be understood.
Tension being understood as a positive thing now instead of doing...
cynics. Well, one of the cynical Hasbro lines is Pallywood. And I mean, it's like there is a lot more video of the Palestinian genocide than basically any other genocide in history. But it's a part of their own nonviolent resistance to their being genocided. And that's what's so fucked up about pathologizing something like that into, they're just liars. Well, it's like, what do you want? There's nothing that can be done that is considered like a moral means of resistance. And so they just have to do something to demand that you recognize this is not an all right way to treat human beings. And
or you'll hear people say, well, why can't we have these protesters go and do something somewhere that I won't notice, that won't affect anyone, and no one will be bothered by it in any way? Mm-hmm. And that is well, then there's no point in protest if
Right.
it doesn't in some way disrupt
Why don't you
your
just
life.
stay home? Why are these people going out on the street? It's their own fault that they're dying because they're going out on the street. You know, it's like you're just saying like they should accept things as they are, and these people are saying they don't want to accept things as they are. So it's a very f***ed up thing to be demanding. It's another one of those things that's been so enervating about all this recent goings on in Minnesota.
Yeah. And to demand a lack of tension, and that tension is just yourself existing in some location at some time that you're not supposed to be there. Yeah.
Okay. We got a lot of good stuff coming up. I'm gonna rip through. So one of the basic points in your statement is that the action that I and my associates have taken in Birmingham is untimely. Some have asked, why didn't you give the new city administration time to act? The only answer that I can give to this query is that the new Birmingham administration must be prodded about as much as the outgoing one before it will act. We are sadly mistaken if we feel that the election of Albert Boutwell as mayor will bring the millennium to Birmingham. While Mr. Boutwell is a much more gentle person than Mr. Connor, they are both segregationists, dedicated to the maintenance of the status quo. I have hope that Mr. Boutwell will be reasonable enough to see the futility of massive resistance to desegregation, but he will not see this without pressure from devotees of civil rights. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it is an historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture, but, as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. We know
there's just so much rich in that last paragraph. I feel like we should.
No, there's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, there's just so much good stuff there.
Yeah.
Like I think, for example, like a relevance of why didn't you give the new administration time to act? There's so many people who are tone policing protesters right now and saying, oh, these people just wouldn't give Trump a chance. They wouldn't give the new regime a chance. Just let them disappear people in your streets and just let your society become better, according to me, because people are being disappeared.
Right, he's cooking right now. So we know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given to the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I've heard the word, wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must never come to see, with one of our distinguished jurists, that justice too long delayed is justice denied. And I mean, it's a good time to say, too, that the definition of politics that people neglect to understand when talking politics is it's about who gets what when, right? That when is very important. So it's like, if it's in 100 years, it's not at all.
Yeah.
It's really the truth of it. That's always been one of the fundamental issues of the...
Yeah, justice delayed is justice denied. If we don't get an answer on what happened to these people in Minnesota,
that's what we're dealing with right now. Yeah, there's
delayed,
at least
justice denied.
2 to 10 ICE agents, exactly. who need to be in prison or being prosecuted actively, and they're not, and it's very alarming. It just speaks to what kind of country we still are, unfortunately. So, this is a good paragraph. So, we have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace towards gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait, but when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers and it will drown your sisters and brothers at whim, then you have seen hate-filled policemen curse and even kill your black brothers and sisters. When you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has been advertised on television and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness towards white people, when you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who's asking, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you, when you're humiliated day in, day out by nagging signs reading white and colored, when your first name becomes the N-word, your middle name becomes Boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs., when you are harried day and haunted by night by the fact that you're a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting for a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will, sirs, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools. At first glance, it may seem rather paradoxical for us to consciously break the laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral and responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. And I mean, that is a powerful sentiment, and it may sound, like pick your own legal system, but what it is really pretty profoundly American, that there is a right that is inherent to being American to say, like, this law, we do not consent to this law. This is not a law that we agree to. And that is, like, foundational.
Yeah, all throughout the history of this country, it's been a foundational part, as you said, of our American society to essentially impose a common class onto everybody. That may not have been perfect. It may have failed many times in its conception, but at least the moment of revolution, for example, people fight for the notion of we the people, which is not specifying a specific group yet. Of course, once they're in power, they started changing that, but it's, I think, important to recognize that most of the time when these great movements of revolution take place, it's essentially a middle class emerging and saying, we don't want there to be extremes on either end. We want to make everybody live under one common set of laws. Nobody is above the law. Nobody is below the law either. And so essentially, I think that that's an important part to recognize, that the creation of modern statehood is essentially middle class imposing its condition more and more onto the excesses.
Right. And
that
I think we're getting close to the
periods like
the halfway point here, but I'm gonna keep cooking through it.
Escape that.
Now, what is the difference between the two, the just and unjust laws? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statuses are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. Segregation, to use the terminology of the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, substitutes an I-it relationship for an I-thou relationship and ends up relegating persons to the status of things. Hence, segregation is not only politically economically and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and sinful. Paul Tillich has said that sin is separation. Is not segregation an existential expression of man's tragic separation, his awful estrangement, his terrible sinfulness? Thus, it is that I can urge men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, for it is morally right, and I can urge them to disobey segregation ordinances, for they are morally wrong. Now, neither of us are very theologically inclined, but I think that's a very powerful paragraph. And I like his choice to reference other Abrahamic schools of thought.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me want to be more theologically inclined.
Right. I'm genuinely. No, it's a beautiful sentiment.
It is a beautiful sentiment,
really,
if that's what religion actually represented. And above the paragraph above, too, I think it's important to put into the context today where he talks about the notion of nobodiness, and he talks about having to explain to your young children why you are treated as lesser than other people. I think that really hits hard today. The notion, there are all kinds of headlines right now about young children being afraid to go to school, actually changing over the last year and being afraid that they might be grabbed or their brother might be grabbed. There was a story of a child saying, if they come for my cousin, I would sacrifice myself or something. For a 6-year-old to have to say that is just incredibly horrific in this moment.
Well, and people, because communism is a essentially secular ideology, people have always, and in other instances, it has been antagonistic to religion because, as MLK has outlined here, that there are unjust laws that get described as being, based in religion. But at the end of the day, it's I've often pointed out to people that the Marx quote that, religion is the opiate of the masses is not meant in a derogatory sense. People apply their lens of, looking down on opiate addicts in the modern day to that. But opium was cutting-edge medicine for relieving suffering at that time when he made that statement. And that's really what he meant is life is difficult, life is challenging, and religion is a solve that people use to, grapple and understand that endless suffering. And I think that that's something that is it's something that people,
that's a good point.
They assume that to be a socialist is to be, inherently militaristically atheist. And, for myself, I would describe myself as a more secular person, but I love his choice to quote a Jewish philosopher in there as well in describing this. And we're going to get to, it looks like in the next couple paragraphs, things about the Holocaust as well. So it's...
Yeah. I mean, just remember, too, that these are all things that he's remembering off the top of his dome.
That's so true. Prison. Yeah, think about what's physically
he's
happening.
Not even showing off. This is ingrained in him. He didn't have to go to a library to look up who Martin Buber was
such a good point.
To have a quote ready to go from him. He's got all these quotes ready to go constantly. Because this is him.
Right. So let us consider a more concrete example, to return to the text, of just and unjust laws. An unjust law is a code that a numerical or a power majority group compels a minority group to obey, but does not make binding on itself. This is difference made...
Oh, what's that, Elon?
I mean, yeah.
This is really the line that as you read it, this is the line I want you to think about Elon Musk retweeting, saying if white people are... If minorities or white people are ever out of power, then minorities will kill us all or something like that. And it's really quite the opposite, obviously, as Martin Luther King lays out here. That, as he said, it's when difference is made legal, that's an injustice. But when you actually make equality legal, then that obviously is the definition of justice.
And you can see some of his socialist leanings. You can see some of his socialist leanings in here too. And there's very much that sort of, I don't know if it's fair to describe him as a Leninist. I don't know if he ever read Lenin, but you could see his understanding.
Yeah, but we're all tied in a garment, as he said, and any injustice somewhere is an injustice everywhere.
Right. His understanding of the ruling class as a minority class is a very unique and special minority class in the arrangement of society really comes through here in that first sentence.
Yeah. And that's why it's important to understand, too, before he was wrongfully killed, he had stated that his next mission after the civil rights movement was to take solidarity one step further for all the working class.
Wrongfully killed by the FBI, we should say, too. I mean, allegedly, but the Martin Luther King family seems to think so. But regardless, so I'm going to keep going. So this is a difference made legal. By the same token, I read that a law is unjust if it is inflicted on a minority that, as a result of being denied the right to vote, had no part in enacting or devising the law. Who can say that the legislature of Alabama, which set up that state's segregation law, was democratically elected? Throughout Alabama, all sorts of devious methods are used to prevent Negroes from becoming registered to vote. And there are some counties which, even though Negroes constitute a majority of the population, not a single Negro is registered to vote. Can any law enacted under such circumstances be considered democratically structured? And I think that's a great question to always be asking about democracy when you're being told very insistently that you live in a democracy and it's a great democracy. Yeah. It's like, well, is it really accounting for the will of a majority of people in this country? And,
And especially when you hear that your leaders are actively working to purge the voter polls in every possible way they can, potentially even getting rid of the right for women to vote, rolling back women's suffrage, rolling back many of the civil rights laws that they're talking about actually rolling back.
Let me keep cooking through here.
The Supreme Court might actually do
Sometimes a law is just on its face and unjust in its application. For instance, I have been arrested on charge of parading without a permit. Now, there is nothing wrong in having an ordinance which requires a permit for a parade, but such an ordinance becomes unjust when it's used to maintain segregation and to deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. He's so intellectually rigorous in all of these delineations, too. It's something that's really admirable. And you can just tell what a powerful intellect he was.
Yeah, think about how they're telling you right now you don't have your First and Second Amendment rights. That, apparently based on certain situations, you can't show up at a protest with a gun or else you deserve to be just murdered on the street like a dog.
Right. So I hope you were able to see the distinction I'm trying to point out. In no sense do I advocate evading or defying the law, as would the rabid segregationist. That would lead to anarchy. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. And I think someone like Renee Good comes to mind with a sentiment like that. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him or her or them unjust and who willingly accepts that penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. Of course,
and as you said with Renee Good,
I'm not mad at you.
I think it's important to point out the Presbyterian Church just declared she's a saint.
Wow.
It's true. She's a martyr for her beliefs. That's pretty cool.
I've had my earliest church experiences in the Presbyterian Church. Shouts out to them for that. That's cool. So
when sects of religion do what they're obviously supposed to in this moment, it's good. I'm only going to say positive things about that.
So to return to the text, because we still got a good bit to go through. Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evident sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
To obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of chopping blocks rather than submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. To a degree, academic freedom is a reality today because Socrates practiced civil disobedience. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. All excellent examples to use to point out that the law is a lot more complicated than just what is on the books at this moment. And actually, those areas where the law is challenged are of critical importance in advancing society, literally.
Literally, the United States is founded upon the idea by Montesquieu of de jure versus de facto. Right. Should the law be what it is always, even when the law is pro-slavery, or should the law always be striving to be perfect?
All right, we're about to hit on...
Should you be following the law as it is written according to the letter, or should you be trying to do what is moral all the time?
To that end, we're gonna hit some very relevant stuff here now, too. So we should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that, had I lived in Germany at that time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying the country's anti-religious laws. See The Master and Margarita, a great book about the religious oppression of the USSR. It's a very interesting text. I think the Chinese have taken a much more holistic approach to religion, and it has, benefited them in some ways. I also think it's a different society that has a sort of different approach to secularism in a very interesting way. So, different times, different places. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than an absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And that is evergreen words on the white moderate. And I think if he were alive today, he would be
and this is one of the points.
This is one of the main stumbling blocks. It
has not changed.
It's why we are so much harsher about the Democratic Party on this show. It's like at the end of the day, they are the ones.
Yeah, it's been enough time to catch on to what's going on with the white moderate, and you've had 60, 70 years to absorb this message of MLK rather than to whitewash him. And another part that we're getting to that I think is one of the reasons why I wanted to get to this is to correct the record a little bit on MLK, because he's often juxtaposed as being like the polar opposite of a figure like Malcolm X. And he's going to talk about some of his disagreements with the black nationalist, black separatist movement. But also, he's a very nuanced man, and I want to point out how I was mistaken by thinking, before I had truly absorbed this piece, I had believed the line about the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. I had, once believed that was true, and then I had spent many years believing that MLK had believed that was true. Right. And what's clear in what comes up here is that he does not believe that. That's just one line taken out of context that if you sort of put in the ether as like a whitewashed version of him in his entirety, it seems like what he's saying is the march of history is inevitable towards social progress.
Right.
You're about to see he does not say that at all.
Right. So
he is actually quite nuanced on this. So yeah.
So here we go. So I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I had hoped that the white moderates would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tensions that hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open, where it can be seen and dealt with, like a boil that can never be cured as long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all of its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Injustice must be exposed, with all the tension its exposure creates, to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. In your statement...
Yeah, and that's why people are filming ICE agents right now.
Exactly.
Injustice has to be... Sunlight is the best disinfectant, as they say.
Yep.
And then I think also, not to keep interjecting, but I also do want to say that last paragraph does have very Marxist implications, as Marx described the working class becoming not just a class in itself, but actually a class of itself.
Right.
That means coming into class consciousness.
Right.
And what he's describing here is the role of the Black American also coming into consciousness.
Right.
That he was promised rights just like all other Americans. And when he recognizes that and demands his own rights, just as he said people in Asia are doing earlier too,
right,
that this is the process of you recognizing you deserve rights, whether that starts with the working class recognizing that they are a disenfranchised class or whether it's African Americans.
So in your statement, you assert that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. But is this a logical assertion? Isn't this like condemning a robbed man because his possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Isn't this like such a good line? Isn't this like condemning Socrates because his unswerving commitment to truth and his philosophical inquiries precipitated the act by the misguided populace in which they made him drink hemlock? Now that I disagree with. We talked about it on our show. It actually, if you read Socrates, it makes sense that they wanted to kill him. He was really annoying. But anyway, so isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never ceasing devotion to God's will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? We must come to see that. As the federal courts have consistently affirmed, it is wrong to urge an individual to cease his effort to gain his basic constitutional rights because the quest may precipitate violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. I had also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth concerning time in relation to the struggle for freedom. I have just received a letter from a white brother in Texas. He writes, all Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually, but it is possible that you are in too great a religious hurry. It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has. The teachings of Christ take time to come to earth. Such an attitude stems from a tragic misconception of time, from the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time itself is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. And, see the example of that negotiation he brought up earlier.
Yeah, sounds like he's not saying the arc of history bends toward justice.
Right.
It sounds like he's saying you actually have to get off your ass and do something.
Right, and think about that negotiation he brought up earlier, too. It's like that was just them playing for time at the end of the day, that bigots use that strategy constantly. So more and more I feel that people of ill will have used time much more effectively than the people of goodwill. We will have to repent.
Look at the Federalist Society and all.
We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively, in the knowledge that the time is always right to do right. Now is the time to make real promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial justice to the solid rock of human dignity. He was such a damn good writer. He really was. He really knew how to put a sentence together.
Now has been for the last 70 years, at least. But
unfortunately, yeah.
Finally.
Yeah. So, and then, I mean, just on my own 2 cents in this before I get into the next paragraph, but I am trying to keep it flowing. If you're ever like, is this person I'm listening to the white moderate we're discussing? We'll give you a little key phrase to be able to catch. See, I'm against, ICE doing extrajudicial murders, but... And there you go. And now you're just like,
but
yeah,
I think if we gave them better training, then maybe it would work out.
That nothing was making me angrier in the wake of those shootings than hearing this all like, oh, of course I'm against ICE killing people in the street, but like just hearing people say that stuff was insufferable. So, and try that on your wife if you're ever, if you're trying to like try the, oh well, I agree with you, but see how she fucking agrees to that, like it's insane. So anyway,
yeah, and see how your constituents agree with you in the next 11 months.
Right. So you speak of our activity in Birmingham as extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that our fellow clergyman would see my nonviolent efforts as those of an extremist. I began thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of 2 opposing forces in the Negro community. One is a force of complacency.
Sounds like a radical leftist.
The radical left. One is a force of complacency made up in part of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, are so drained of self-respect and a sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation. And in part of a few middle-class Negroes who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and because in some ways they profit by segregation, have become insensitive to the problems of the masses. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred, and it comes perilously close to advocating violence. It is expressed in the various black nationalist groups that are springing up across the nation, the largest and best known being Elijah Muhammad's Muslim movement. Nourished by the Negro's frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination, this movement is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely repudiated Christianity, and who have concluded that the white man is an incorrigible devil. And that's very interesting. I don't know.
He's offering a dialectic right there, very explicitly. I mean, yet again, pretty Marxist or Hegelian. He's telling you the thesis, the antithesis, and now laying out the synthesis for you. Right.
Well, and I find that so interesting, too, because it's like the role of Islam, I think, has changed quite a bit in the U.S. at this point in time. But, Somalis are, by and large, Muslims. There's a lot of Muslim Somalis. There's a lot of it's a very interesting dynamic that has continued to evolve, and I think it's interesting that he is... Speaking of them repudiating Christianity, but it's like I hope we can live in a world where all 3 of these Abrahamic religions that ostensibly worship the same God can learn to get along. And to the extent that like I have a dog in that fight or any right to say anything, I feel Christianity has almost more to apologize for than anyone else. But that's not necessarily true of like Christianity for Black Americans. That's like almost its own different like subset and community of Christianity in America that's a lot more homogenous in the South specifically. So that's just like interesting cultural currents that you see in this, and I understand why. I don't know. I find all that really interesting. So
yeah, and I mean, look, in this moment, as I mentioned, that the Presbyterian Church is saying that Renee Good is a saint.
Respect.
The Catholic Church under the new Pope has been also quite liberal and quite maybe even further left than liberal, just like Pope Francis. So,
yeah, well,
we've got some Christians on our side, and yet then you have the evangelicals and the whatever the fuck J.D. Vance represents as a Catholic, fighting the Catholics that oppose the Pope, apparently, and argue the antithetical argument against the Pope.
MLK had some Christians on his side too, so it's always going to be a mixed bag. So I have tried to stand between these two forces, saying that we need to emulate neither the do-nothingism of the complacent nor the hatred and despair of the Black nationalists. For there is the more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I'm grateful to God that through the influence of the Negro Church, the way of nonviolence became an integral part of our struggle. If this philosophy had not emerged, by now many streets of the South would, I am convinced, be flowing with blood. And I am further convinced that if our white brothers dismiss as rabble-rousers and outside agitators those of us who employ nonviolent direct action, and if they refuse to support our nonviolent efforts, millions of Negroes will, out of frustration and despair, seek solace and security in black nationalist ideologies, a development that would inevitably lead to a frightening racial nightmare. And that's, a wise podcaster once said that the point of America is to create Black Hitler. And, I think that's a very interesting, Candace Owens made a really good run at it recently. Kanye West was doing his best there, but he's nationalism overall we've talked about is just, it's a failed idea. And I understand he makes a very good case for explaining why part of its appeal, at least in the black community.
Yeah,
but right. I tend to agree with them. It's
why did Never Again repeat itself and ended up becoming, toxic nationalism?
That's a great comparison,
it's
right?
A snake eating its own tail.
I was thinking about that too, with the reaction of Israeli nationalism, the way that these ethnic nationalist movements end up finding strange bedfellows with each other because they all believe in this sort of imaginary sorting of ethnicities that will somehow sort everything out, and it's truly deranged, and it never works. And you can't run from these things. I think that's why I tend to come down more on the side of someone like Martin Luther King, even though I do think there's a lot to be learned from someone like MLK as well, or from Malcolm X and I think those are very important movements to learn about too. So anyway.
Yeah, and as I pointed out before, juxtaposing the two of them as if they're on complete opposite ends of a spectrum doesn't really make sense.
No, right, exactly.
They both came to moderate, I suppose, closer and closer to one another,
right,
as time went by, and we have no idea how they would have continued to evolve if both of them were not taken from us far too soon.
He's saying, right, very well said, and I think he's saying here too that these folks, I may disagree with their tactics, but ultimately, if I don't win this argument and you don't concede to me in this argument, they will win this argument in the black community, and it will not be a pretty sight. And I want to find a better solution because I know what they're preaching leads. And who can say if he was going to be right?
A dialectic synthesis.
Right. Who can say if he's right? But I can't say I ever would agree with any kind of Afro-pessimism. And you look at a figure like Clarence Thomas, and it's I think that's another great way to look at this. Where does this and frightening racial nightmare go?
Or where's the line?
That's the kind of person.
Right. Where's the line with Marx too? A man who rides the dialectics, and many accuse him of being violent, but he's not quite being violent. What he's actually saying is that the working masses should never disarm themselves,
right,
because the power, just as our own founding fathers in America said, the people in power should fear their people.
Right.
It should not be the other way around. The people should not be afraid of the people in power.
Right.
The people in power should be afraid of the people.
Well,
and that's why you don't have to advocate for violence while saying that the working class and the middle class should absolutely, under no circumstances, ever disarm themselves, because the threat of violence should always exist.
Right. And so we must simply stop interjecting now, or at least cut it down, because I think we've covered a lot of the best stuff here, and there's still a lot of good stuff
there's
to read through.
There's some great stuff. So let's try to speed through.
But I'm going to try and get through the rest of it. Yeah, so bear with me. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself, and that is what happened to the American Negro. Something within has remained him of his birthright of freedom, and something without has reminded him that it cannot be gained. Consciously or unconsciously, he has been caught up by the zeitgeist, and with his black brothers of Africa and his brown and yellow brothers of Asia and South America and the Caribbean, the United States Negro is moving with a sense of great urgency towards the promised land of racial justice. If one recognizes this vital urge that has engulfed the Negro community, one should readily understand why public demonstrations are taking place. The Negro has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations, and he must release them. So let them march. Let them make prayer pilgrimages to the city hall. Let them go on freedom rides and try to understand why they must do so. If their repressed emotions are not released in nonviolent ways, they will seek expression through violence. This is not a threat, but a fact of history. So I have not said to my people, get rid of your discontent. Rather, I've tried to say that this is normal, healthy discontent and can be channeled into the creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. And now this approach is being turned extremist. But though I initially disappointed at being categorized an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an even flowing stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel? I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise, so help me God. And John Bunyan, I will stay in jail till the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience. And Abraham Lincoln, this nation cannot survive half slave and half free. And Thomas Jefferson, bold of him to put him in there, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for preservation or injustice, or for the extension of justice? In that dramatic scene on Calvary Hill, 3 men were crucified. We must never forget that all 3 were crucified for the same crime, the crime of extremism. 2 were extremists for immorality and thus fell below the environment. The other, Jesus Christ, was an extremist for love, truth, and goodness, and thereby rose above his environment. Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists. So good.
Yeah.
I had hoped that the white moderate would see this need. Perhaps I was too optimistic. Perhaps I expected too much. I suppose I should have realized that few members of the oppressor race can understand the deep groans and passionate yearnings of the oppressed race, and still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. I'm thankful, however, that some of our white brothers in the South have grasped the meaning of this social revolution and committed themselves to it. They are still all too few in quantity, but they are in big quality. Some, such as Ralph McGill, Lillian Smith, Harry Golden, James McBride Dabbs, Ann Braden, and Sarah Patton Boyle, have written about our struggle in eloquent and prophetic terms. Others have marched with us down nameless streets of the South. They have languished in filthy, roach-infested jails, suffering the abuse and brutality of policemen who view them as dirty N-word lovers. Unlike so many of their moderate brothers and sisters, they have recognized the urgency of the moment and sensed the need for powerful action antidotes to combat the disease of segregation. Let me take note of my other major disappointment. I have been so greatly disappointed with the white church and its leadership. Of course, there are some notable exceptions. I am not unmindful of the fact that each of you has taken some significant stand on this issue. I commend you, Reverend Stallings, for your Christian stand on this past Sunday in welcoming Negroes to your worship service on a non-segregated basis. I commend the Catholic leaders of this state for integrating Spring Hill College several years ago. And just one quick note here, I want to say, all of the people protesting in Minnesota, all of them, the people like Renee Good, people like Alex Preddy, those are the kind of people that MLK would have been name-checking here. You know what I mean? Like, those are the kind of people that...
Absolutely. Yeah, in today's time.
Right. Like, as anyone talking about, like, just stay home with them, it's like, you are exactly the white moderate that he is expressing disappointment in, and the people who he actually receives as real enough to name-check as being allies in this moment are the people who are actually out there putting their bodies on the line, putting their lives on the line. And
yeah, if you are in a political party and you have a letter next to your name, he's talking to you directly.
Yes, directly. But despite these notable exceptions, I must honestly reiterate that I have been disappointed with the church. I do not say this as one of those negative critics who can always find something wrong with the church. I say this as a minister of the gospel who loves the church, who is nurtured in its bosom, who has been sustained by its spiritual blessings, and who will remain true to it as long as the cord of life shall lengthen. When I was suddenly catapulted into the leadership of the bus protests in Montgomery, Alabama a few years ago, I felt we would be supported by the white church. I felt that the white ministers, priests, and rabbis of the South would be among our strongest allies. Instead, some have been outright opponents, refusing to understand the freedom movement and misrepresenting its leaders. All too many others have been more cautious than courageous and have remained silent behind the anesthetizing security of stained glass windows. In spite of my shattered dreams, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious leadership of this community would see the justice of our cause and with deep moral concern would serve as the channel through which our just grievances could reach the power structure. I had hoped that each of you would understand, but again, I have been disappointed. I have heard numerous Southern religious leaders admonish their worshipers to comply with a desegregation decision because it is the law. But I have longed to hear white ministers declare, follow this decree because integration is morally righteous and because the Negro is your brother. In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churchmen stand on the sidelines and mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. And I have watched many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion which makes strange, unbiblical distinctions between body and soul, between sacred and secular.
Yeah, and just one note of relevance to that is also that there just recently were quite literally hundreds of ministers who were arrested in Minneapolis in a show of protest.
Great
so
point.
As we said,
really
there
point.
are plenty of great Christians out there and preachers who know in this moment what is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And some of them have actually organized because that in itself is a powerful message. Hundreds of priests getting arrested for civil disobedience.
And to get back to the point I was making earlier about sort of Marxism or religion is that, like, it's not that Marxism is inherently Christian. Some people would certainly argue that. I certainly would definitely strongly disagree with that, and Marx definitely did as well. But I think the point I was trying to get to is that I think really any religious tradition can comport with like a socialist, communist, Marxist
secular,
worldview.
Humanist values.
Right, like those values are inherent into any
can all
religious
be synthesized
tradition.
Together.
Right, and that comes through in this letter too, where he speaks of his profound disappointment with the white church. Really, at the end of the day, these are tools that people use to express a lot of the things they already, the structures they already adhere to and believe. So, hold on now. Just make sure I'm still recording. Okay, so we're gonna keep trucking because we're almost done here. So
yep, we're getting there.
I have traveled the length and breadth of Alabama, Mississippi, and all the other southern states. On sweltering summer days and crisp autumn mornings, I have looked at the South's beautiful churches with their lofty spires pointing heavenward. I have beheld the impressive outline of her massive religious education buildings. Over and over, I found myself asking, what kind of people worship here? Who is their God? Where were their voices when the lips of Governor Barnett dripped with the words of interposition and nullification? Where were they when Governor Wallace gave a clarion call for defiance and hatred? Where were their voices of support when bruised and weary Negro men and women decided to rise from the dark dungeon of complacency to the bright hills of creative protest? Yes, these questions are still in my mind. In deep disappointment, I have wept over the laxity of the church. But be assured that my tears have been tears of love. There can be no deep disappointment where there is not deep love. Yes, I love the church. How could I do otherwise? I am in the rather unique position of being the son, the grandson, and the great-grandson of preachers. Yes, I see the church as the body of Christ, but oh, how have we blemished and scarred that body through social neglect and through fear of being nonconformist? There was a time when the church was very powerful. In that time when the early Christians rejoiced at being deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed in. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Whenever the early Christians entered a town, the people in power became disturbed and immediately sought to convict the Christians for being disturbers of the peace and outside agitators. But the Christians pressed on in the conviction that they were a colony of heaven, called to obey God rather than man. Small in number, they were big in commitment. Yeah. They were too God-intoxicated to be astronomically intimidated. but their efforts example they brought to, but by their effort an example they brought an end to such ancient evils as infanticide and gladiatorial contests. Things are different now.
Yeah. And
so often the contemporary church...
One thing I just want to add there is, what group could possibly say that their origins did not begin as outside agitators?
Right.
Like Christians today in the United States act like the dominant class, but in Roman times, as he's alluded to, you were tortured for your faith. Have you completely lost that sense? Right. And the answer is yes. And then when it comes to Israel, same exact problem.
Right. Very well said.
It's very clear that, yeah, exactly. So you can move on, but it's just very obvious. And even going very far back in the history of Judaism, you were once slaves in Egypt and you left for the promised land and you established a shining city on a hill. And like, what society did not start out with those ambitions to create an equal paradise on earth, essentially?
Right.
And they all fail ultimately.
So often, sorry, I just want to keep it moving.
Sorry, you can continue. Yeah, let's keep it moving.
So often, the contemporary church is a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. So often, it is an arch defender of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silent and often even vocal sanction of things as they are. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If today's church does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose the authenticity, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. Every day I meet young people whose disappointment with the church has turned into outright disgust, and I would count myself among those, unfortunately, in many instances, and I'd say that that trend has definitely continued.
It's worse now than ever.
Right, yeah, and it's not like we're not
trend has continued. We have
actually
actually hit an all-time high of disgust amongst
I think that, it just speaks
religion.
to...
For good reason.
Right, it's unfortunate, but it's like...
After 70 years later of not dissolving this very clear message.
Right.
And you're purposely ignoring it at this point.
And this is
everybody can understand this. It's quite simple. You're purposely ignoring it if you have a letter next to your name and are in a political party.
Right. And
one of the two major political parties.
This is a great letter, and unfortunately I think it is very prophetic, but you can see him questioning his own optimism in this next paragraph, and as we've been elaborating on, it's like, unfortunately, I think he had good reason to question that, because it's like we just said, it's that a lot of these things he's spoken of have not gotten better, but have in fact gotten much worse. And, we're going to try and end on an
And as he said earlier,
note,
too, people of ill will have made better use of time, as he said.
Yes, right.
And somehow he predicted that 70 years after he was taken from us, or 60, however long it's been at this point, he sort of called out that there was going to be people of ill will working much harder, and the people of moderate or goodwill are to blame for not speaking out much sooner.
We're almost done here, so let me finish. So perhaps I have once again been too optimistic. Is organized religion too inextricably bound to the status quo to save our nation and the world? Perhaps I must turn my faith to the inner spiritual church and the church within the church as the true ecclesia and hope of the world. Again, I'm thankful to God that some noble souls from the ranks of organized religion have broken loose from the paralyzing chains of conformity and joined us as active partners in the struggle for freedom. They have left their secure congregations and walked the streets of Albany, Georgia with us. They have gone down to the highways of the South on torturous rides for freedom. Yes, they have gone to jail with us. Some have been dismissed from their churches and have lost the support of their bishops and fellow ministers, but they have acted in the faith that right defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. Their witness has been the spiritual salt that has preserved the true meaning of the gospel in these troubled times. They have carved a tunnel of hope through the dark mountains of disappointment. I hope the church as a whole will meet the challenges of this decisive hour. But even if the church does not come to the aid of justice, I have no despair about the future. I have no fear that the outcome of our struggle in Birmingham, even if our motives are at present misunderstood, will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with America's destiny. Before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the pen of Jefferson etched the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence across the page of history, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored in this country without wages. They made cotton king. They built the homes of the masters while suffering gross injustice and shameful humiliation, and yet out of bottomless vitality, they continued to thrive and develop. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the opposition we now face will surely fail. We will win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands. Before closing, I feel impelled to mention one other point in your statement that has troubled me profoundly. You warmly commend the Birmingham police for keeping order and preventing violence. I doubt that you would have so warmly commended the police if you had seen its dogs sinking their teeth into unarmed, nonviolent Negroes. I doubt that you would so quickly commend the policemen if you were to observe their ugly and inhumane treatment of Negroes here in our city jail. If you were to watch them push and curse old Negro women and young Negro girls, if you were to see them slap and kick old Negro men and young boys, if you were to observe them as they did on 2 occasions refuse to give us food because we wanted to sing our grace together, I cannot join you in your praise of the Birmingham Police Department. Is it true that the police have exercised a degree of discipline in handling the demonstrators? In the sense they have conducted themselves rather non-violently in public? But for what purpose? To preserve the evil system of segregation. Over the past few years, I have consistently preached that nonviolence demands that the means we use be as pure as the ends we seek. I have tried to make it clear that it is wrong to use immoral means to attain moral ends. But now I must affirm that it is just as wrong, or perhaps even more so, to use moral means to preserve immoral ends. Perhaps Mr. Connor and his policemen have been rather nonviolent in public, as was Chief Pritchett in Albany, Georgia, but they have used the moral means of nonviolence to maintain the moral ends of racial injustice. As T.S. Eliot said, the last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right deed for the wrong reason. I wish you had commended the Negro sit-inners and demonstrators of Birmingham for their sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of great provocation. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the James Merediths, with the noble sense of purpose that enables them to face the jeering and hostile mobs, and with the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer. They will be old, oppressed, battered Negro women, symbolized in a 72-year-old woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity and with her people decided not to ride segregated buses, and who responded with ungrammatical profundity to one who inquired about her weariness, "My feet is tired, but my soul is at rest." They will be the young high school and college students, the young ministers of the gospel, and a host of their elders courageously and nonviolently sitting in at a lunch counter and willingly going to jail for conscience' sake. One day the South will know that when the disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the Founding Fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And, very interesting to hear him name-check Judeo-Christian heritage. We may have some personal quibbles here with him on these last sentiments, but overall, a resoundingly excellent letter, and I'll just finish these last couple paragraphs because it's all very powerful. So, never before have I written so long a letter. I'm afraid it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk, but what else can one do when he is alone in a narrow jail cell other than write long letters, think long thoughts, and pray long prayers? If I have said anything in this letter that overstates the truth and indicates an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. If I have said anything that understates the truth and indicates my having a patience that allows me to settle for anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. I hope this letter finds you strong in faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as an integrationist or civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not-too-distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King Jr. So that's the letter from the Birmingham jail. He really fucking served it with that one. It is a really, really beautiful document. And I think it really speaks for itself. And we try not to speak over it too much, but We hope you've enjoyed listening this far.
That's all right.
We look, there's stuff to discuss, and it's like we said throughout that it's evergreen.
It's worth tying into the current moment. Yeah,
it's evergreen.
Though it is evergreen.
Like just everything to do with
it's incredibly relevant to this moment, and you could basically substitute certain people like the chief of police and Chief Pritchett just replaced with Tom Homan, for example.
Right.
And
I mean,
as they try to clean up, as he said at the end, using moral means to keep immoral ends in place.
Right.
And how, that even ties to the current moment after the killing of Alex Preddy, that they decided to get rid of Bovino and to swap him out with Tom Homan. And it's like, even if it's just a PR move ultimately. And as he said, that's even more disgusting to try to basically shuffle the chairs around and to try to make it look like you're doing something moral, trying to say, oh, well, we're taking disciplinary action for the two people that killed Alex Preddy. And it's like they're not actually they're not doing an open investigation.
Right.
They're completely concealing what they're actually doing, but just making a public announcement. Oh, we did our own internal review and we solved it. So zero accountability in the public, according to the way that we are used to.
And in the last episode, when we discussed Renee Good, the last one we released, I had made I was re-listening to it, and I was listening to my comments about the cops and how, even though the cops are also violent thugs in most instances, there is some sort of recognizable difference in the extreme, in how extreme the ICE agents have been. But this letter was a great sober reminder that actually no, it's all time and place, and it's really just the racists know how to find the job that lets them do the thing they want to do. As monstrous as that, they are unfortunately that shrewd, and they know how to use time.
Yeah.
So we have to do the same.
Yeah,
so,
people of ill will have made better use of time. So now it's time for people of goodwill to start making use of the short time you have to fix things before this country is irreversibly and existentially changed into something that you will regret.
To that end, I think we should close out. We appreciate you taking your time to celebrate Black History Month with us a little bit and reread the words of the wise Dr. Martin Luther King. Let's do some Malcolm X documents next time too. We'll spice it up. But
absolutely, I'd love to talk some Malcolm.
Find a good Malcolm X document, but. I'm your host, Butler. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening this far, and we appreciate your patronage. Those of you who are on the Patreon, subscribe if you're not. We got the Florida series on there too, where many of these themes come through, and then lots of exciting plans for the new year. So stay tuned. You got anything you want to say before we sign off here?
No, that's all.
Awesome. Alrighty. Have a good night, y'all. Thank you.
To my knees, yeah. Don't stop. You can't shake this off. Don't stop. They can't touch this shit. Yeah, don't stop if you feel where you're at, then they can't shake you off. No, don't stop to the sound of the gun.